Today I'm going to show you my absolute favorite way to make glitter pens. This is a super quick and easy way to do it, and this entire process took me just around an hour, and I made 12 pens. These are pre-glittered blanks from Happy Fox Supply Co., and they are ready to go. You can just unscrew the bottom, and the top does stay on. But they are super smooth, and you can go ahead and apply vinyl or decals, whatever you'd like on these. You can even put alcohol inks for other colors. There's a lot of things that you can do with these, but today I'm going to show you how to apply full wraps. These wraps are also from Happy Fox Supply Co. You can buy her wraps either to fit these pre-glittered pens or ones that are sized for the ink joys if you prefer to use those and glitter them yourselves. All of these are clear so that the glitter will show through them. When you apply these, there will be a very slight overlap. You can either choose to let it remain, or you can use an X-Acto knife and cut the overlap, just as when you do full wraps for tumblers. I normally will eyeball it, and it's pretty easy. You can line up the design, do it visually, and lay it down. When you flip it over, it's also very easy to tell if it's lined up. Then I just fold over one edge and roll it on the table, and it is nice and smooth. You just want to make sure that there's no hair or dust or dirt or anything that is underneath that wrap. Once you wrap, it almost looks like you could just leave it as is, but these are removable, so we are going to epoxy over these. Again, I normally eyeball it, but if you look very closely on these pre-glittered pens, you can see a very faint seam. You can use that and just line up the edge if you want a little bit more control until you really get used to wrapping them. It's very easy as well. You could also score or put a faint pencil mark, whatever works best for you to get the wrap lined up. But as you can see here, that's one that I used the seam to line up. When you're using these pre-glittered pens and her wraps that are pre-sized for it, I've noticed there's a very slight overhang on the bottom of the pen. It's really easy to trim up. I normally use scissors. You could use an X-Acto knife, and I'll show you real quickly what that process looks like as well. If you do choose to glitter the Inkjoy pens, again, she does have a wrap that is sized for those. It's a little bit larger to accommodate for your epoxy layer. So you just want to be mindful of the amount of epoxy that you're putting on the Inkjoys before you put the wraps on. Because if you do a super thick layer, then you might not have as much room. But she does a great job of testing everything out and making sure that it'll work for your pens. You can also use these pens for water slides. That's what I did previously on a lot of my pens, is just using digital files that I had and print out my own water slides and wrap them as well. Again, either the decals or the water slide wraps can go directly over these pre-glittered pens. These wraps in particular, if you do wrap them on the pen and they don't quite line up, you can pull them off. But it's important to know that these, as well as most other clear cast pen wraps, will stretch a little bit during the removal process. But they can absolutely be used. You might just need to spend a little bit more time making sure that you don't have any air bubbles in them. Overall, these pens are the absolute easiest thing that I have ever used to make glitter pens. And here I'm just trimming up with scissors. I do cut the edges at an angle because it's important, just like with tumblers, to make sure that your epoxy gets a good seal over the decal so you don't have any peeling. So I do hold them kind of at about a 45-degree angle as I'm going around and cutting any of the excess off. Once again, just to make sure there's a good seal. Once that edge is all trimmed up, it's time to epoxy them. I'm using UV resin, so I have a cup of water that's wrapped in aluminum foil with the shiny side in, and that's what I'm going to use to help cure these. I'm doing a decent size strip, just one strip down the side using this UV resin, and then I'm going to roll it around in my hand, making sure that I pay attention to the top and bottom edge, again, to make sure that I've got a good seal and plenty of epoxy there. Because I'm using UV resin, it's also important that before I put it in the water, I go through and get everything as smooth as possible. Because UV resin cures so quickly, if you have any bumps or drips, that's going to cure and you're not going to get as smooth of a finish. If you prefer using 2-part epoxy, you absolutely can do that. I definitely recommend an attachment for your turner. Then I'm placing my UV light directly on the top of the cup. I'm going to press it to the 60-second option, and I'm going to do that twice. I find that with the thickness of the layers that I use, that gets it about 98% cured. The exact length of time that you'll need will vary based on the different factors, like the type of UV resin you use, the wattage of your light, and the thickness of the layer of UV resin. Of course, the thicker the layer, the longer it does take to cure. So if these times don't work for you, just experiment and see what works best for your own needs. The reason I said that it was about 98% cured and why I don't do it another 30 or 60 seconds is really just a time saver for me when I'm doing a bunch of pins. Doing it for 120 seconds gets it cured enough to where I can go ahead and take the pin out of the water and move on to my next pins. Typically when I do pins, I'm doing them in larger batches, so it's just a small thing that I found that works for me and saves me a little bit of extra time, but you absolutely can leave it in here until it fully cures. Once I do take the pin out of the water after the 120 seconds, I usually just take it and I'm going to roll it on a paper towel and dry it out some, which you'll see here in just a moment. But then I put it back underneath the UV light and continue to let it cure as I'm doing the rest of my pins. That's why it's not really a big deal for me that it's not its absolute hardest when I take it out of the water. This may seem really silly or foolish to y'all. It's just what I do. We all have our quirks. When you're finally done with your light and your pen, when you take it out, you want to make sure that you tap and kind of shake the water out because water is definitely trapped in there. Then I just roll it on the paper towel to get it mostly dry and set it over to the side before I go on and do the rest of my pens. Another reason I really like using these pre-glittered pens is because it's so smooth. Sometimes I can get away with only one layer of UV resin. It really just depends on the thickness and the application. There happened a few times where I wasn't fully happy with the smoothness of the pen, kind of around the seam area. In those cases, all I do is sand it down with high grit sandpaper and do another coat of the UV resin, just like you would a tumbler. Just continue the process until you get a good smooth pen. I usually just hold the pen by the clicker in my left hand and use that to turn it, but if you don't like doing that, you absolutely could use some form of dowel rod attachment and put each of the pins on there. It does make it slightly more difficult to put the pen in the water and use the UV lamp, but it's absolutely doable. You can use it to apply the epoxy and then take it off and put the pen in. You can also just use that dowel rod, put it underneath your UV light and turn it, rotate it, whatever your preference is. You do not have to use the water to cure it. It's just become my favorite method to do with these pens because I don't have to have that many fancy tools or pieces of equipment. I have also used the turner attachments and put the UV pins on there and use 2 blocks and set my UV light on top of that turner arm as they rotate. But because they're constantly rotating, you do need to leave your light on for a significantly longer period of time. You can also always go for the whole tried and true 2-part epoxy and put it on your turner. I do that a majority of the time when I'm actually glittering my pins myself. Happy Fox Supply Co. does also have non-glittered metal pins, so I have used those and primed and painted and glittered them myself if I wanted a different color base, because these pins do just come pre-glittered in white. But she does have 3 different colors of metal hardware that go with those. I primarily make pins as freebies or for local vendor events, and they normally sell really well at my events. So even if this is not something that you're looking to sell on a regular basis, it's definitely something fun and different that you can do. And I do highly recommend it for vendor events, because I always recommend having a wide variety of items with different price points for everyone that comes and visits your booth. I do also make them and take them to a local boutique shop where I sell my products, and they also do very well there as well. But because I do primarily do tumblers, I do like this method because I don't have to worry about taking up arms of my turners when I'm using 2-part epoxy, and I can reserve those just for my tumblers and have those bad boys spinning while I'm sitting up here epoxying these with the UV resin. You can see my collection of pins that have already been in the water underneath the light. I do kind of touch and move those around from time to time so they get that additional cure time. But if you do have any pins that are tacky at all after the water, you do want to make sure that you spend time with them underneath the UV light, even outside of water. If there is any part of it that is tacky, you're going to need to make sure that that is cured properly underneath the UV light before moving forward. Then once everything is dry and all cured, then I just go in and put in the ink and close that up. With these pins, if you do feel a little bit of resistance when you're trying to screw the cap on, it probably means that the clicker is depressed and you just need to click it once. So this is the final result after 1 coat of UV resin. I hope you found this helpful, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them all.